The vote was not close. 412 delegates of the Galactic Concord raised their hands, tapped their approval lights, clicked their mandibles, or waved their biosignatures in whatever way their species used to say yes. 7 voted no. 3 abstained. And with that, humanity was in. No one cheered. There was polite noise, the kind made when something harmless happens and everyone agrees to be kind about it. Grand Arbiter Soln, a Velhari elder whose pale skin had gone almost translucent with age, folded his 4 hands and gave a short speech about unity and the generosity of the Concord. His voice carried the careful warmth of someone handing a stray animal a small piece of bread. Humanity was the 63rd species admitted to the Galactic Concord. They were also the only species in recorded history to arrive at the admission ceremony in a ship held together in 3 places by a welding compound that was technically no longer approved for interstellar use. The human vessel, called the Perseverance, drifted into Docking Bay 9 with the kind of slow, grinding confidence of something that had no business still flying, but did not know that yet. The bay went quiet. Other ships in the surrounding bays were sleek and luminous, long silver things that hummed with clean energy and smelled of processed atmosphere. The Perseverance smelled of burnt coolant and old coffee, and its hull had been repainted so many times in so many colors that it looked, from a distance, like a piece of debris. Dr. Nadia Roche stepped off the ship and into the receiving hall of Luminal Reach, and she looked at everything with the quiet, careful eyes of someone who was counting and measuring and filing information away for later. She was not tall. She was not physically impressive in any way that the Concord would have recognized. She had dark hair pulled back simply, a worn jacket with a small Earth flag patch on the shoulder, and a data tablet she never put down. She shook Grand Arbiter Soln's hand. His kind had 4 hands. He offered the bottom 2, which among the Velhari was the greeting given to children and guests of low station. She shook both and smiled, and said it was an honor to be there. She meant it, and she also meant something else entirely that she kept very much to herself. The reception that followed was polite the way a waiting room is polite. Other species kept a precise distance. The Faranoi, insectoid, quick-eyed, deeply intelligent, sent their ambassador Quill, who stood 3 meters away and watched Nadia eat a small piece of what passed for food on Luminal Reach. He watched the way a scientist watches an experiment. Nadia noticed and did not let on that she noticed. A junior aide from the Dorothi delegation, a reptilian species that made up a significant portion of the Concord's military, leaned toward a colleague and said something in a low voice. The translation device on Nadia's jacket caught it. The aide had said, letting children into a library, harmless and pointless. Nadia took a slow sip of something warm and bitter that was not coffee, but was trying its best. The Dorothi Fleet Commander, RYSS, had not attended at all. His absence was noted by everyone and explained by no one. Among his people, not attending a small ceremony was itself a statement. No one needed to translate that one. That night, in the small room assigned to the human delegation, the smallest on that entire level, positioned at the end of a corridor that also contained storage units, Nadia sat at the edge of her bunk and wrote her first report home. She described the station, the delegates, the food, the distances people kept. She described the ship that the Velhari Honor Guard used, which had weapons systems that could strip an atmosphere in 40 minutes. She described the fact that the Concord's collective defense budget was larger than the GDP of every nation on Earth combined, multiplied by a number she had to double-check because she did not believe it the first time. She described the way Soln had smiled at her. The smile that said, "You are small, you are brief, you are not dangerous, and we are glad you are here because it costs us nothing." At the end of her report, she wrote one sentence that was not part of the official filing. She wrote it in a personal note that she encrypted under 3 layers and flagged for her own eyes only. It said, "They think we are weak. Good. Let them." She put the tablet down and looked at the ceiling. Somewhere far beyond the ceiling, beyond the station and the binary star it orbited, beyond the outer edge of Concord space, a long-range sensor array picked up an anomaly. It was a pattern, not random, not natural. Something moving, something large. The array logged it automatically and sent a routine report to a monitoring station whose night shift analyst had 62 other alerts to sort through. The analyst filed the anomaly under Category 7, unidentified, low priority, observe, and report. Then he went to get something to eat. Nobody thought about it again that night. The station kept turning. The lights in the diplomatic quarter went dim on a schedule. Nadia Raj closed her eyes and listened to the unfamiliar hum of a foreign life support system and thought about everything she had seen and everything she had not yet seen, and the very large difference between those two things. The Concorde had taken in a stray. They were certain of that. They had looked at the creature and seen its soft skin and short years and emotional face and known, with the comfortable certainty of those who have never been wrong about something like this, that it was harmless. They were not wrong that humanity was strange. They were not wrong that humanity was small. They were only wrong about what strange and small things do when they feel the ground shift beneath them. But that lesson was still coming. The first sign was silence. Ashrel was a Faranoi colony world. 12 million people, 3 large settlements, a network of smaller outposts, and a relay station that sent a routine signal to the Concorde every 6 standard hours without fail. The signal had been sending for 40 years without interruption. Then, on an unremarkable Tuesday by Earth reckoning, it stopped. No distress call came before it. No partial message. No burst of static that might suggest equipment failure. One signal came through at the scheduled time, clean and ordinary. The next one never did. The relay station, the settlements, the 12 million. All of it simply went quiet, the way a fire goes quiet when there is nothing left to burn. Ambassador Quill received the news in his study aboard Luminal Reach. He read the report 3 times, which was unusual for him. He was the kind of mind that processed things quickly and moved on. He read it 3 times and then sat very still for a while, which was unusual for anyone who knew him, because Quill was not still. His kind were always moving. Small adjustments of their 4 limbs, the constant flicker of their upper eyes, the soft sound of their wing cases shifting. He sat still and did not move for 11 minutes, and the aide who came to check on him found that deeply unsettling. The Concorde sent observers. A Velhari diplomatic frigate and 2 Darathi patrol vessels crossed into the outer region and made for Ashrel's coordinates. They found the planet. It was still there. The atmosphere was intact. The lights of the settlements were still on, visible from orbit, the soft glow of cities that were still powered but no longer inhabited. The observers sent a full scan down to the surface and found buildings, roads, equipment, food still sitting in containers that had not been opened. They found no bodies. They found no signs of struggle. They found 12 million people's worth of everything except 12 million people. The Darathi captain filed his report and, while waiting for instructions, dispatched 3 probe drones toward the outer edge of the system, toward the direction from which anything coming into Ashrel would most logically have come. The probes lasted for minutes. Then they were gone too. The Concorde convened an emergency session. The Velhari proposed dialogue. The Darathi proposed force. Both positions had the quality of things said by people who had not yet understood what they were dealing with, but did not know that yet. Fleet Commander RYSS personally led the military response, a show of strength that the Darathi believed in deeply and practiced often. He brought 7 warships, including his own flagship, the Crest of Iron, which had never lost an engagement in 30 years of service and carried enough firepower to crack open a small moon if the target was not moving. The battle lasted 9 minutes. The Voth came out of the deep dark in a formation that RYSS had no tactical name for, because it was not like any formation he had studied. They moved the way a single large thing moves, not a fleet, not separate ships making coordinated decisions, but something whole. When RYSS's gunners fired, they hit. Their weapons struck true. The Voth ships took the impacts and continued moving. The Darathi gunners fired again. Again, the weapons connected. Again, the Voth came on. The Crest of Iron lost power in its forward section on the 3rd exchange. Then the second ship in the formation simply stopped. Not damaged, not burning, just stopped, as though the idea of continuing had been removed from it. The 3rd ship's crew reported that their systems had gone dark from the inside out, as if something had walked through the electronics and turned off every switch. RYSS gave the order to withdraw when he had 3 ships left. He was not a man who gave that order easily. He gave it because the alternative was having no ships left, and no ships left meant no information getting home, and information was the only thing he had managed to bring back that had any value. The crest of iron limped into luminal reach with its forward section sealed off, and its hull scorched in patterns that the engineering team had not seen before and could not immediately explain. RYSS sat in the debrief room and gave his report in a flat, steady voice. He described what he had seen. He described what the weapons had done and what the weapons had not done. He described the way the Voth moved, the way they communicated nothing that his analysts could detect, the way they seemed to operate without hesitation or variation. When the debrief officer asked what RYSS recommended, the fleet commander was quiet for a moment. "More ships," he said. "Many more ships." It was the only answer he had, and everyone in the room understood that it was not a good enough answer, and no one said so out loud, because saying so out loud would have required them to sit with what came after. Nadia Rosh watched the full battle footage 3 times in her room that same evening. She watched it the way she watched everything. Carefully, systematically, pausing often. She mapped the Voth movements on a secondary screen. She noted the intervals between their maneuvers. She noted the direction they had come from and the direction they returned to. She noted the 3 moments in the 9-minute engagement where the Voth had done something slightly different from the pattern they were otherwise following. Then she walked down the corridor to where Admiral Ray Culver had set up her working space, a table covered in paper maps, which the station staff found peculiar, since paper was not common on luminal reach and maps of this kind were considered outdated. Culver was sitting at the table with her hands flat on the surface and her eyes on a particular section of the outer region star chart. "You saw the footage," Nadia said. 3 times, Culver said. Nadia pulled out a chair and sat down. "They have a pattern." "They have 3 patterns," Culver said. "Same angles, same timing intervals, 3rd variation at minutes 4, 6, and 8. Predictable if you know what to look for." Nadia looked at her. "We have to tell the Concorde." "We will," Culver said. She did not look up from the map. Her finger traced a line between 2 star systems near the Concorde's inner ring. "After we figure out what we're going to ask for when we do." Outside the window, the binary stars of luminal reach turned slowly. Somewhere far beyond them, in the cold dark that the Concorde sensors reached into only partially, 12 million people were nowhere. And something that had taken them was still moving. There are things that live at the bottom of very cold oceans on Earth. Things that have no eyes because there is no light to see with. Things that have learned to feel pressure and heat and the vibration of other living things passing nearby. They do not fight beautifully. They do not fight with any grace. But they have been at the bottom of that ocean for a very long time, and everything that ever tried to remove them is gone, and they are still there. Sergeant Dax Oren had read about those creatures once, years ago, and forgotten where. He thought about them now, lying in the rubble of what used to be a processing facility on Port Solace, listening to the sound of a Voth patrol moving through the street 2 levels below him. Port Solace was a colony world, primarily industrial, not beautiful, important mostly for what it produced and shipped. The Voth had taken the northern hemisphere in 6 hours, which was faster than the Concorde's analysts had believed possible. The southern settlements were partially intact. Admiral Culver had looked at the tactical picture, identified Port Solace as a choke point the Voth needed for their next push inward, and had done something that surprised the entire War Council. She had not asked for fleet support. She had asked for 2,000 infantry, 6 months of supplies, and the right to operate without oversight. The War Council had debated this for 3 hours. RYSS had argued against it loudly, calling it a waste of soldiers on a world already half lost. Solon had listened to everyone, and then asked Culver one question. "What do you intend to do?" Culver had spread her paper map on the council table. Heads had turned at the sight of it, and put her finger on 5 points across Port Solace's southern terrain. "Make it expensive," she said. She got what she asked for. Dax had been on Port Solace for 11 days. He had not slept in a bed in 9 of them. He had slept in collapsed utility tunnels, in roof spaces, in the sealed cargo compartments of vehicles that the Voth had already searched and moved past. His unit of 40 soldiers had been broken into groups of 4. They did not hold ground. Holding ground was not the objective. The objective was to be everywhere and nowhere, and to make every hour of Voth presence on Port Solace cost something. They cut supply lines. They collapsed tunnels the Voth were using for movement. They reprogrammed automated freight systems to block key corridors. They used the colony's industrial chemical stores, things meant for processing and manufacturing, and turned them into problems the Voth had not anticipated. They hit a Voth command node at night, not with heavy weapons, but with targeted power interruptions and a great deal of fire from 3 directions at once, and then they were gone before the Voth could organize a response. Private Gus Fallon was 22 years old and had been in active service for 14 months. He had trained for conventional warfare. He had not trained for this, and neither had anyone else, because this was not something that existed in any manual. It existed in Dax, somewhere below the level of training, in the part of a person shaped by every hard thing they had ever lived through. "How do you know what to do?" Gus asked one night, when they were wedged into a utility crawlspace above a Voth-occupied transit hub, waiting for the patrol rotation to complete. Dax thought about it. "I don't know what to do," he said. "I know what I can't do. Can't face them straight. Can't hold a line. Can't win a fair fight. So I take away the fair fight. That's it." "That's most of it," Dax said. "The rest is just not dying long enough to matter." The Voth hive mind processed information from every unit simultaneously. When a patrol was destroyed, the loss registered instantly across the whole, and the appropriate adjustment was made. This was how they had fought for longer than the Concord's oldest records reached. They were not used to an enemy that seemed to have no central node, no command pattern, no clear resource to target. They were not used to an enemy that got worse to fight the longer the fight went on, as though experience was being added to them in real time. The hive mind categorized the humans as an irritant, then as a moderate disruption. On day 14 of the Port Solace engagement, it recategorized them as a significant tactical complication, which was a category the Voth had not used in 11,000 years. Nadia Roche monitored the battle data from a relay post 3 systems away. She tracked Dax's unit movements, the Voth response patterns, the rate at which the Voth were losing equipment and time. She built a graph. The graph showed a line going in a direction that, if she was reading it correctly, and she was very rarely wrong about this kind of thing, suggested the humans were going to win a ground engagement against a species that had deleted a 12 million person colony in a single night. She sent the graph to Admiral Culver with one note attached. "They're confused." Culver's reply came 20 seconds later. "Good. Keep watching." Quill obtained a copy of the battle data through channels he declined to specify and spent an entire standard day going through it. He made notes. He crossed out notes. He made different notes. At the end of the day, he opened a new file, titled it simply Humans, Revised Assessment, and began to write. He wrote about the capacity for endurance under conditions that should produce surrender. He wrote about the willingness to absorb damage in exchange for positional advantage. He wrote about the way human soldiers seemed to perform better as conditions worsened, as though difficulty sharpened rather than dulled them. He wrote about the 11 days of continuous operation with minimal supplies and no reinforcement. Then he stopped writing and looked at the data one more time. He was looking at a species that had, by every prior metric, no business being in this fight. No natural armor. No hive mind. No collective processing. Short lives. Enormous emotional volatility. Individual units that could be killed by almost anything and yet kept coming back. He added one final line to his assessment, read it back to himself, and decided not to change it. It said, "Threat rating, incomplete. Pending further observation. Do not underestimate." On Port Solace, on the 15th day, Dax's unit destroyed a Voth logistics hub and then disappeared into the tunnels before the response units arrived. Gus was bleeding from a cut above his eye. He wiped it away and kept moving. Nobody watching would have called it beautiful. But the Voth, for the first time in a very long time, were losing ground to something they did not understand. RYSS asked for the meeting himself. He sent the request directly to Admiral Culver through a private channel, not through diplomatic staff, not through the War Council, not through any of the layers that normally existed between a Darathi fleet commander and a human officer. The message was 4 words long. It said, "I need to understand." Culver met him in a small room off the main strategy level. No aides. No translators. RYSS spoke Concord Standard well enough that he did not need one, and Culver had never needed much help being understood. She arrived before him and was reading a paper document when he came in. He sat across from her and folded his large hands on the table. "Port Solace held," he said. "It did," she said. "My analysts have been over the battle data. They cannot explain it in terms they recognize. He paused. Among the Dorothi, pausing before speaking was a sign of genuine difficulty, not performance. I want you to explain it to me. Culver put down her paper. She looked at RYSS for a moment, reading his face the way she read tactical maps, looking for the things that were actually there, not the things that were expected to be there. How much do you know about Earth history? She asked. He knew what any Concord diplomat knew. Humans had achieved interstellar capability recently, had a single origin world, maintained a patchwork system of nations rather than a unified government, and had a recorded history of roughly 5,000 years. Standard file information. Nothing that had ever seemed relevant. Tell me the parts that matter, he said. Culver thought for a moment. Then she talked for a long time. She talked about wars that lasted 100 years. She talked about sieges where cities ate everything they could find and kept fighting. She talked about soldiers who walked into artillery fire across open ground because the objective was behind the artillery. She talked about the innovation that came out of conflict, not the weapons themselves, but the thinking around them, the constant pressure to do more with less, to find the angle the other side hadn't seen, to be unpredictable in ways that were almost instinctive. She talked about the fact that humanity had been at war, somewhere on Earth, for almost the entirety of its recorded existence. That there had been perhaps 2 centuries in 5,000 years where no organized human violence was occurring anywhere on the planet. That every generation of humans alive today was the descendant, in some direct or indirect way, of people who had survived something. RYSS was very still. He was not still the way Quill had been still. That was the stillness of processing. RYSS was still the way a large animal goes still when it realizes it has misidentified something. You did not evolve past it, he said. We didn't have time, Culver said simply. And by the time we did, we'd gotten good enough at it that it became something else. RYSS looked at the table. We believed your aggression was a failure of development. That given enough time, you would become, he stopped. Like everyone else, Culver said. Yes. I know, she said. There was no anger in it. She was not interested in being angry about it. She was interested in what came next. What came next, in part, was Nadia's team. The human team had approached it as a problem. There was a difference. Nadia had looked at the technology and asked one question first. What does it need? Not what does it do, not how was it built, but what does it require to function? She worked from the dependency outward. She found that Voth systems, all of them, relied on a continuous low-frequency field that passed between units. It was how the hive mind maintained coherence over distance. It was how individual Voth units stayed connected to the whole. Without it, a Voth unit was not destroyed, it was simply cut off, isolated, a thread pulled from a web. She found the frequency. She built a device that produced an interference pattern at that frequency. It was not elegant. It was made from parts that were not designed for each other, assembled in ways that its components manufacturers would not have approved, and it looked like something that had lost an argument with a tool cabinet. It worked. The first test was run on a Voth patrol unit that had been cut off from the main force near Port Solace's outer edge. The interference device activated. The Voth unit stopped moving. Then it moved differently, slower, without coordination, individual members making separate small decisions instead of one unified motion. They did not die. They did not retreat. They simply fragmented, like words losing their grammar, like a sentence that still has all its letters but none of its meaning. Quill watched the test footage from his observation post. He watched it 6 times. He made a note in his journal, an old physical journal, a habit he had maintained for decades, and the note took up 3 pages. The essential point was short, though. He had written it first, before the rest. I have been studying humans for 7 months as an academic matter. I have been approaching them the way one approaches an interesting artifact. I understand now that I was wrong to do so. He described the resonance device. He described its construction from mismatched salvage. He described the fact that no Concord research team, with full access to proper equipment and proper time, had found this. And he described what that meant about the difference between reverence and hunger, between looking at a problem with admiration and looking at it with the intention to solve it. His final note said, "It is not a flaw. It is a craft. They have been practicing it for 5,000 years, and we have been counting their teeth." Grand Arbiter Soln received a copy of Quill's assessment late in the evening. He read it once, set it down, and looked out at the stars. He had championed humanity's admission to the Concord. He had given a speech about generosity and unity. He had used the word harmless in a private conversation with a colleague less than 4 months ago. He picked up the report and read it again. Then he went to his desk and began drafting a new resolution, one that gave the human military command full authority over all Concord forces in the current engagement. He wrote it carefully. He thought about what to say to explain the change of position. In the end, he decided that the explanation was in the footage, and the footage was already on every screen in Concord space, and anyone who had watched it already understood. He signed the draft and sent it to the council without further comment. Outside, the stars continued their slow business. And somewhere in a small lab that smelled of burnt wiring and human determination, Nadia's team was already working on the next version of the device, which was smaller, stronger, and significantly less likely to catch fire when activated. They had a war to finish. Intelligence does not always arrive as a message. Sometimes it arrives as a feeling, the particular feeling of watching something shift in a pattern, of noticing that what was predictable has changed, and understanding before the data confirms it that the change means something important. Culver had that feeling on a Tuesday. The War Council's analysts confirmed it on Thursday. The Voth were pulling back, not retreating. The Voth did not retreat the way other species did, with disorder and fear. They were consolidating. Every unit across the contested zone was compressing inward, drawing toward a central line. On the tactical map, it looked like a hand closing into a fist, and Culver stared at that closing fist for a long time before she said anything. "They're massing," she said. The council's senior analyst walked through the data. It was exactly what it looked like. The Voth were gathering every available force into a single formation, the largest single military deployment the Concord had ever seen from one species, larger than anything in the historical record. The analyst's best count put it at 2/3 of all known Voth military capability, assembled at a staging point 12 days travel from the Concord's core worlds. Their intent, the analyst said carefully, appears to be a direct assault on the inner ring, a decisive engagement. Eliminate the Concord's capacity to resist in a single action. The council chamber was quiet. 2/3 of all Voth military capability was enough to do exactly what the analyst was suggesting. The math was not complicated. Everyone in the room could see it. "They've never done this before," Soln said. "No," Culver said. "They haven't." She looked at the map, which means something has frightened them. A short silence. "Or frustrated them enough to end it," RYSS said. His voice was flat, not defeatist. RYSS was not capable of defeatism, but honest in a way that respected the weight of what they were looking at. Culver turned to the map and let everyone wait. She had learned a long time ago that thinking out loud in rooms like this was dangerous. People attached to half-formed ideas and defended them before they were ready. She thought completely and then spoke. She said, "While their main force is away from the Voth coordination nexus, the nexus is exposed. The nexus, identified through battle data analysis and confirmed by 2 weeks of long-range sensor work, was the primary node through which the Voth hive mind maintained global coherence. It was not a building. It was not exactly a ship. It was a large, fixed installation deep in what Concord analysts had designated Voth core space. Heavily defended, almost certainly, but the defense would be reduced if 2/3 of the military was elsewhere. A counterstrike, RYSS said. He understood immediately. While they move toward us, we move toward them. If we destroy the Nexus, Culver said, the hive mind fractures. Their forward force loses coordination. They don't stop existing, but they stop functioning as a single entity. She paused. The interference devices scale. We've confirmed that. Large enough emitters, close enough to the Nexus, and we don't need to destroy it. We just need to break it. The risk, said Soln, is that our core worlds face their main force while our fleet is moving in the opposite direction. Yes, Culver said. That is the risk. She looked at him. The risk of not going is that we face their main force with nothing accomplished and no second chance. It was RYSS who stood up first. He stood slowly, and the sound of his chair moving back was the only sound in the room. I will go, he said. He did not look at Culver when he said it. He looked at the map. It was not a gesture made for her. It was a decision made by a commander who had looked at the same calculation and arrived at the same answer. One by one, the other fleet commanders signaled their ascent. The joint force departed 8 days later. 41 ships, Darathi, Velhari, human, and 4 other species who had joined the war effort quietly and efficiently once they understood what was happening. The human vessels were not the largest or the most armed. They carried the interference emitters, which required proximity to use. They would go in closest. Dax did not know the strategic details. He knew that his unit was boarding a ship that was going somewhere the ship might not come back from, and that this was the job, and that the job was the job. He checked his equipment. He checked Gus's equipment. He made a poor joke that Gus didn't laugh at, and then laughed at himself for making it. The battle for the Voth Nexus lasted 3 hours. The joint force came out of drive at the edge of Voth core space and immediately came under fire from the defensive installations. They had expected this. The Darathi ships absorbed the first wave and pushed forward. The Velhari used their long-range systems to suppress the outer defenses. Slowly, painfully, the formation moved inward. Dax's ship took a strike to its forward section during the second hour. The blast tore through 3 decks. Gus found Dax in a collapsed corridor. The sergeant was pinned under a section of ceiling panel, conscious and swearing with the focused creativity of a man who has a great deal of feeling and limited vocabulary to express it. Gus got the panel off him. Dax had 3 broken ribs and a cut across his arm that was bleeding more than it should. Gus wrapped it, told him he was fine even though the evidence was mixed on that point, and got him moving. The interference emitters needed to be activated at close range. The 6 ships carrying them, for human, 2 Darathi, pushed through the defensive line in the final 40 minutes of the engagement. They took fire. All 6 ships were damaged. 2 were damaged severely. They kept moving. The emitters activated at close range on the Nexus. One by one, then all at once. Quill was watching from a relay post 3 systems out, receiving the sensor feed in near real time. He watched the Nexus on his screen, watched it as the interference pattern built around it, as the hive mind coherence it produced began to fluctuate, as the fluctuation became disruption, as the disruption became collapse. He watched the moment the Nexus went dark. He sat with that for a while. He did not celebrate. He looked at his screen and thought about 12 million people on Ashrel, and about the Voth units that were now drifting in the void like letters that had fallen off a page, still there, still physical, but without structure, without connection to each other or to anything larger than themselves. The forward Voth fleet, 3 systems away, stopped its advance. Not in retreat, not in response to a command, but in the sudden absence of the thing that made the command possible. The hive mind's forward elements experienced something for which the Voth had no record, no category, no word. They experienced isolation. On a damaged ship coasting toward the edge of Voth space, Dax lay against a wall with his arm wrapped and his ribs making each breath a small act of will. Gus sat across from him in the half-dark. "We won," Gus said. It came out sounding like a question. "We did something," Dax said. He shifted carefully. "Whether it's won depends on what comes next." The stars outside the cracked viewport were very still and very cold, and the ship drifted on through the silence that had been made where a hive mind used to be, and the galaxy held its breath without knowing it was doing so, and waited to see what humans would do with what they had just accomplished. A year passed the way years do after hard things, unevenly, with some parts moving too fast and some parts barely moving at all. The immediate aftermath of the Nexus collapse was not a clean victory. It was not the kind of ending where the enemy lays down arms and everyone understands what has happened. The Voth that remained were not destroyed. They were scattered, individual units and small clusters drifting through the outer systems without coordination, without purpose, without the central mind that had told them what they were. They were not retreating. They were not attacking. They were simply present, confused, separate, in a way that no Voth had ever been in living memory. Some of them died. Some were captured. Some continued moving out of what seemed to be instinct alone, heading in directions that no longer had any strategic meaning. Concord ships tracked them carefully. The Darathi wanted to destroy the remaining forces completely. Our YSS made that case clearly and without apology. It was the kind of argument a person makes when they have watched their own crew die, and the math still comes out the same way regardless of how you feel about it. Nadia Rosh sat in the Concord assembly and listened to every argument and then asked to speak. She was quiet in the way she was always quiet. Not small quiet, not afraid quiet, but the quiet of someone who has been listening carefully for a long time and has something to say that will not be said twice. She said that the Voth as they existed now were not the same entity that had destroyed Ashrel. The hive mind that made those decisions, that coordinated those actions, that had operated as a single will across thousands of bodies, was gone. What remained were individuals, disoriented, frightened in whatever way their kind experienced fear, cut off from the only form of identity they had ever known. She said that destroying them now would be clean and easy and would mean killing beings who were, in a genuine sense, not the same beings who had started the war. She said that the Concord was a community of species, that its entire premise was that different kinds of minds could exist in relationship with each other. That if that premise only held when the species in question arrived already peaceful and already understood, then the premise was not very sturdy. She proposed study instead of destruction. Structured contact, an attempt to understand what individual Voth were without the hive, and whether that version of the Voth could become something other than what they had been. The assembly voted. It was close, 41 in favor, 37 against, 9 abstentions. Quill cast the final vote in favor. He recorded a formal note alongside his ballot. It said only, "The question of who they can become is more important than the fact of who they were." RYSS heard the result in his temporary quarters on Luminal Reach. He sat with it. He did not agree with it. He turned it over in his mind for 2 days, looking at it from different angles, and he could not make himself agree with it. But he could recognize that Nadia had made the argument in good faith, that the vote was legitimate, and that he was going to respect it regardless of his opinion of it. On the 3rd day, he went to find Culver. She was where she usually was, at a table with maps on it, in a room that was getting cluttered with the organized mess of someone who thought best when surrounded by physical things they had arranged themselves. She looked up when he came in. "I wanted to say something," RYSS said. She waited. "I was wrong about your people," he said. "When you arrived. The things I said, the things I did not say but believed. I was wrong, and you deserve to hear me say so directly." Culver looked at him for a moment. She had known this conversation was coming, or something like it, in the vague way that you know certain things are inevitable without knowing when they will happen. "You don't owe me that," she said. "I know," RYSS said. "I'm saying it anyway." She nodded. There was a pause that was not uncomfortable. "Sit down," she said, and pulled a second chair out from the table. "I want to show you something." She spread a new map. This one showed the full Concord, all 63 member species home systems, the contested zones, the outer edge where the Voth had come from. She put her finger on a small point in the inner ring. "What we did here," she said, "bought time. Maybe a lot of it. But the Voth aren't the last thing that's going to come out of the dark." She looked at him. "We need to get better at what we do. Together." RYSS looked at the map. "You are already making plans." "I'm always making plans," she said, and almost smiled. The new Concord resolution passed 3 weeks later. It established a permanent human seat on the War Council, not a courtesy seat, not a junior observer position, but a full vote with full authority. 410 in favor, 2 against, 1 abstention. The resolution's text referred to humanity as a valued and essential member of the Concord's collective defense. Quill noted in his journal that the language was careful and slightly understated, which was a form of respect the Concord extended to things it took seriously. Dax and Gus were on the Perseverance when the vote passed. The ship had been repaired, not beautifully, but effectively, and was making a slow transit back toward Concord space. Dax's ribs had healed well enough that he was only mildly irritated by deep breaths rather than genuinely pained by them, which he considered a satisfactory outcome. They went outside in their suits, because the hull still had a good observation platform near the midsection and the view was clear, and sometimes after a hard thing you needed to look at something large and quiet. The stars were numerous and indifferent and beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when they have been there long before you and will be there long after. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Gus asked. He meant all of it. The war, the choices, the vote, the question of what came next for the scattered Voth. Dax was quiet for a while. He was always quiet when he was actually thinking rather than talking. "I think we did the necessary thing," he said. "I think necessary and right are different questions, and I'm not smart enough to answer both of them at once. He looked out at the stars. Ask me again in 20 years. Gus considered that. What if the answer changes? Then we'll have learned something, Dax said. 3 systems away, Nadia Roche transmitted her final formal report to Earth. She described the war, the vote, the new council seat, the Voth question. She described the way the galaxy had looked at humanity when the Perseverance first docked at Luminal Reach, and the way it looked at them now. She wrote about the difference between being feared and being respected, and about how neither of those things was the goal she had set for herself when she first filed her encrypted personal note 12 months ago. She ended the report with a single line. Not encrypted this time. Not flagged for her eyes only. It said, "They no longer think we are weak. Now we have to decide what we actually want to be." She sent it. She put her tablet down. She looked out at the same stars that Dax and Gus were looking at from 3 systems away, and she thought about the question she had just written, which was the only question she had ever found worth asking twice. The Perseverance moved through the dark. The Concorde kept turning. And humanity, having shown the galaxy what it could do when cornered, took the first quiet step toward the harder work of showing it who it chose to be.